Hey y'all, welcome to the Clock Tower. I'm Colton, here with Brandon.
And today we have a special guest with us. We have Clinton here, who is over at the Georgia Regional this time around. Thanks for joining with us.
Yep, no problem. Thanks for having me.
Two more Springfest tournaments happened over this last weekend to talk about, as well as an update to the restriction list. But first, let's talk about what happened in Germany. Top four, 8 standby Quince, 8 standby MTI, and then Escanor. Second place, Quince, SDS, Coronet Marine. Third place was Slime, 8 standby Quince and Kanata Marine. Fourth place was Dal, with 2 different choice triggers and the pants. Tokyo Revengers and 8 salvage Quince. Not a ton of surprises in this top four. The Dal list is a little bit unorthodox. But aside from that, a lot of the usual suspects here. Quince showing up on all 4 teams. We saw 1 8 salvage. We talked about how we weren't expecting to see a lot of that 8 salvage list because of the 8 standby list. But if the 8 salvage list gets played, it's going to do quite well for itself. And it did here. It actually ended up with 2 top 8s. But a lot of Quince, a lot of Hololive, and everything else is, about what we expected to see here. With, of course, the exception of that Dal list, which I think is the most interesting one. It runs that Toka top end, pay 3, pitch 2, fix the top 3 of your opponent's deck, and then try to burn 5. So a big swing there from the Toka. If it doesn't work, you probably don't win, but you have a pretty high probability of actually hitting that, even into a compressed deck. Brandon, what's your take on this Dal list?
Definitely running the choice combo at 1 to try to get those resources to continue to kind of loop those. Plays into the anti-change counter a little bit more heavily, probably playing into those board-based decks. With the extra resources you get from the level 1 combo, you can probably pay that out pretty effectively. Probably guarantee an extra lane of survival that you wouldn't normally. You have an optional top end. You can kind of switch back and forth between the Kurumi that plays around with clock and also heals off, or the Toka that heals. So both have healing top ends, so you're trying to stall out at 3 just a little bit longer. You still have some defensive tools, including the Neg Soul counter. So definitely a deck that tries to close out, but has backup contingencies in case it doesn't.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting, right? I don't dislike it. I love that it's creative and finds ways to put cards together. But yeah, looking back at the rest of top 4, like we said, a lot of stuff that we expect to see, a lot of standby lists, both Quince and there was an MTI in there, a pair of the normal Escanors, a Slime. Dual laners continues to be relevant, and we see it also in the rest of top 8. Kanata Marine, dual laners, and 8 standby Quince. Escanor, Kanata Marine, 8 standby Quince. 8 standby MTI. Goblin Slayer with the Neg Soul top end, and 8 salvage Quince. The Bang Dream list with Nanami and Rimi. Watame Marine Hololive, and another 8 standby MTI. Again, no real surprises here other than maybe Goblin Slayer, but maybe the Neg Soul has a little bit more staying power in a meta that has things like Escanor. That's really the only thing out of the ordinary, I think, in this entire top 8, other than that Dal list.
No, actually, I think that's a really good analysis between the Neg Soul and Escanor, especially with it hitting the full field. Yeah.
Next, let's talk about Georgia.
Clinton, since your team was there at Georgia, would you briefly kind of go over how your team did at the event and kind of what that looked like for you guys?
So to recap, my team went 4-2. There was 46 teams. We played 6 rounds. We finished 11th. But thanks to quirks of this amount of teams at this amount of rounds and stricter enforcements of double game losses for games that don't complete, there were only 1 undefeated, 3 X1s, and 4 X2s that made it to top 8. Thankfully, it hasn't happened to me or my team yet. But one of the rounds where we were finished early and I was wandering and looking, where I saw a game where one player was at 3-6, the other one was at 2-4, but that game didn't end. The judge ruled it a double, accurately and properly ruled it as a double game loss. And then because the other 2 games were split, and both teams ended up getting losses, which was absolutely the worst case scenario for both teams.
Absolutely something to be aware of as we're getting into more regionals. Very careful with time and how they're judging time can drastically affect games, for sure. Anything that you would have maybe changed differently going into the event after having played through it?
Yeah, I think I would have readjusted our seating arrangement. So instead of having it at the Seven Deadly Sin deck at A, Hallow Live at B, and then myself as the Slime Player at C, I think I would have moved myself up to A at the very least, and then shuffle the other two around depending on how a better feeling how I feel people are configuring their teams.
Any advice for going into a regional?
Yeah, going in, people should remember to fill out the online registration form ahead of time. It'll allow you to, unlike last season where you're locked into your deck like 2 weeks out in advance, you could still make changes all the way up until the day of. You could just tell them to update the deck log code for that specific slot, and you're, good to go. But you want to make sure that you're going into that event already having it filled out. And then tournament procedure wise, I would also say to, be cognizant of how much more strict Bushy Road's actually implementing giving out double game losses where games cannot finish within time with the plus round/10 minute rule.
Looking at top 8, Colton, what decks do we see in top 8?
First place, Kanata Marine, 8 Pants Kaguya, and Salvage Pants Danmachi. Second place was Escanor, Sora Marine Hololive, and Slime. Kanata Marine, Escanor, and 8 Standby Quince took third. Salvage Choice AOT, Kanata Marine Hololive, and Standby Bar MTI rounding out fourth place. Honestly, this weekend kind of feels like the meta has settled down a little bit. Like it was a little bit all over the place last couple of weeks. We saw a lot of stuff that we didn't expect to see. This weekend, very straight line meta stuff for the most part. You see Hololive on every top 8 team in Georgia. You see Quince on almost every top 8 team in Georgia. It's on 5 of the 8. You see quite a bit of SDS, 5 in the top 8 as well. And even the stuff that doesn't have a ton of presence, Danmachi, Kaguya, AOT, MTI, nothing here that we're surprised by. All these things are, relevant. They were recognized as relevant from the start of the season. I think the thing that's most surprising to me, actually, looking at this more, is just the presence of Hololive. Not that Hololive is bad. I'm a little surprised to see a Hololive list on all 8 of the top teams. And 5 through 8 we don't have deck lists for, so there's no telling if there's Sora, Kanata Marine, or some other concoction. But 3 Kanata Marines in top 4, Sora Marine, as we mentioned, coming in second. A lot of Hololive. That seems to be pretty consistent with North America in general. But in Georgia specifically, a ton of Hololive running around.
The most popular decks for this event that almost most teams had were Seven Deadly Sin Escanor decks and then Kanata Marine Hololive decks.
5 through 8 real quick. Hololive Quince Sunshine. Sunshine getting its first top of the season, I think. SDS Hololive Quince, SDS Hololive Quince, SDS Hololive Quince. 4 of the top 8 teams, the exact same makeup. Presumably Escanor and 8 Standby Quince. Probably something ending in Marine with Hololive, either Sora or Kanata, both of which are still quite viable. Those are the results from this past weekend. Like we said, I think mostly pretty grounded in what is understood to be the meta. But also this last week, Bushy Road announced that there will be additions to, or changes to, I should say, the restriction list. There was a community tier list that came out, but honestly, it's basically what we expected, and this restriction list has the potential to completely shake that up. The changes will be announced on April 7th, so later this week, and they'll be effective starting April 21st. So the next set of tournaments will have this restriction list in place because we don't have any until the 23rd. Also, during that time period, on April 21st, the new Sword Art set comes out. It will not be legal for play until early May. Mexico City, May 7th will be the first tournament when that is playable because you have to give it 2 weeks from release. But between this and Alice, the meta is set to shake up considerably heading into the middle of the Springfest season. We are still, relatively early on here, still in April, events going all the way through mid-June. But during this 3-week gap, between Georgia and the Philippines. A lot is happening. Let's start with this restriction list update. A lot of speculation about what it may or may not be.
So the pick 2, personally, I would want it to have data live cards getting unrestricted, because I feel like at this point that it's well outdated, especially that poor 1-0 Toka is definitely should be off, because nobody really gonna play her over the new 1-0 Katori. But more likely, the pick 2 side restriction is probably going to be both the Sora Brainstormer and the Sora level 3 from Hololive. And then the pick 3 sides, which would be the more important side and relevant side to the formats, would be adding the Ichika Brainstormer to the current quintuplets choices. And then, although it doesn't show it, but I also believe that they're going to tack on limiting the level 3 standby combo Nino to 2.
Yeah, no, I think that makes complete sense, kind of matching what JP already has, especially as both of those sets have new releases coming. With that in mind, do you think that's going to limit the amount of quints, especially, kind of going into the rest of the season for spring?
So I felt like, there wasn't as many quintuplets decks that I saw in the field, especially the traditional 8 standby Nino build. So I felt that, a lot less people are gonna play it. And now with that restriction list, it's gonna encourage more people to play other newer decks like Kaguya, and possibly with the new Dale cards, and then soon to be the Alice from anniversary set, the anime anniversary set, because not only does hitting that Ichika reduces how fast they could go through their deck, but also restricting the Nino not only lowers their level 3 finishing game, but it also, lowers by a couple of good percentage points of them getting that really oppressive, ridiculous turn 1 of playing a climax and then triggering a Nino to put out 2 1/1s that are really difficult for the opposing player to reverse, and may not even be able to reverse them for the rest of the game for quite a while.
I think what we're seeing here is preparation for things to come. Quince is most assuredly going to be the first ones to be hit, right? That seems pretty viable. Quince has been a top contender since fall of last year. The other one is a bit more interesting. There's a lot more room for interpretation. I like the idea of lessening the ban list. I could also see it trying to match in with the JP list before Hololive 2 comes out. I don't think it's going to be Escanor. Escanor's not been out long enough yet. It's only really going to be clearing the way for Alice as it comes.
Yeah, and I think that, and we talked about this at length, right? Like, I think obviously I have a much harsher stance on this than you do. I just think the ban list is still just bad. It's a negative for the game. There's really no reason to have anything on the ban list right now, I don't think. Certainly not Kaguya. I don't think Dal would be overpowered if you brought it back. And Quince barely ran the Nexel counter anyway. And giving MTI its tap counter back, like, I don't think there's anything on the restriction list right now that, if unbanned, would make the game unreasonable. And, this is coming from someone who has been long opposed to the ban list on principle. So I just, there are no surprises there. You've heard me rant about this before, so I'm not going to carry on. But the other thing that strikes me as an issue here, it's twofold, right? One is the timing of the ban list is just wretched. If you've been preparing since Worlds for your Spring Fest, you're going to France, you're going to Houston, you're going to the Philippines, and you're on Hololive. You're on tenterhooks. You're waiting to see if your deck gets hit. If you're on Quince, you've been fine-tuning this list, this 50-card list, for literal months, and now you're going to almost certainly see another change. Right before, in the middle of an event season, right before these one-off events, why do this? There's always going to be a best deck in the format. And the biggest issue with the ban list on principle, I said I wasn't going to rant, but here we go, is that now, if you hit Quince again and pull it down another half a peg, that just opens the floodgates for Alice to be the unmitigated best deck in the format when it drops in 2.5 weeks. Alice was already going to be one of the top decks as soon as it dropped. It was already going to be at least an A tier deck. But it was not unreasonable. It wasn't unfair. It's just good. And it's good that the game has good cards. There are lots of good cards right now. You can see this in the meta, right? Like, looking at Georgia, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 different sets represented in top 4. That's really good. The meta is more balanced now than it has been in years. And if you brought back Data Live and if you let Kaguya have its cards, the meta would probably be even more balanced. There'd probably be even less Quints running around Hololive at the top tables. But instead, you're going to restrict the good things, and then as soon as Alice comes out, it's going to be dominant. Not because it is that much better than everything else, but because you've restricted everything else to the point where it is just hamstrung. Like, those decks are still good, but you're just going to let Alice run free for the rest of Springfest, and then what? You're going to have to ban Alice going into fall? This is literally what we talked about as soon as the ban list got announced. And they're going to keep releasing stuff that's more and more powerful than the stuff that gets hit. And then as new stuff gets released, not only does it become the best deck in the format, it becomes far and away the best deck in the format.
With the ban list incoming, we're looking forward to seeing what that looks like in regards to what sets get hit, so we kind of have an expectation of what's to come. Good luck for the players that have 2 weeks to figure out what they're doing, especially as we go into Texas here coming up in 2 weeks. So the last tournament before Alice is dropped with the ban list in effect. So we'll see how that tournament goes. We're in for a wild ride this spring season, that's for sure.
But yeah, no, we'll see what happens. Obviously, I'm not super optimistic, but maybe that lack of optimism is misplaced. We'll find out. In any case, that happens on Friday. Next tournaments don't happen until the 23rd, so we will have a little bit of time in there to see exactly how everything goes down.
As we begin to wrap up, Clinton, is there anybody you wanted to shout out?
Yeah, I would like to shout out to players and people that I know and met again from the southeastern part of the United States. The venue in Georgia is fantastic. I definitely recommend it for people who are in the area and people who are out of towner. It's definitely a great event to visit. Like, I'm looking forward to visiting again in the fall and hopefully future springs too. I would like to give a shout out to the winning team, especially my friend Matthew Ann. I think people know him more as a good Vanguard player, but they don't remember him being a great Weiss player, well before the pandemic.
We'll be back on Thursday, 5 cards, 5 minutes. On Tuesday, Brandon will have a deck tech, and we'll have gameplay the following Thursday. Until next time, thank you so much for joining us. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe, and have a good one.
We'll see you then.